Hello and welcome back. I'm Desmond Annabrand, Grants Program Manager here at Southeastern Minnesota Arts Council. In the previous video, we walked through logging into your grant interface account, accessing the application form, and getting started with the application by completing the applicant information and work sample sections. If you haven't watched the previous video or if you're looking for other videos in this series, you'll find links to them in the description below. In this video, we'll begin developing the project itself. We'll focus on the About Your Project and Public Engagement component sections of the application and discuss several important decisions you'll make as you begin defining your project and planning how the public will experience it. So, without further ado, it's time to trade the map for the journey. Alrighty, so we are back in the grant interface. This is how it should look like if you've started an application, you save the application, and then you log out. So when you log back in, this is the first screen that you'll see. This is what we call the applicant dashboard. Some may call it the home page. But you should be able to find that last grant application form under Action Needed. And you could access this again by clicking either this option here or this button here, and it'll lead to the same destination. I'm just going to go with this one. Maybe in the next video, I'll try and use the different button. Okay, so we are back in our application form. I'm just going to collapse all sections so we get to see what we will be talking about today. So in the previous video, we've talked about the application information for culture bearers and work samples. Today, we'll be talking about your project and public engagement component. Although there are some options under the About Your Project that are branching questions. So it will open up, I think, two new sections under About Your Project. Anyway, we'll get to it. What is project discipline? So in this question, you'll be asked to choose what kind of project discipline your project will fall into. And discipline codes help SEMAC understand the primary artistic discipline represented by your proposed project. There is a list. If you click on this click here option there, you could go to this page and you could see all of the discipline codes, and you could select whatever is relevant for you. If your project could fit into more than one category, I won't worry too much about finding the perfect answer. Simply choose the code that best represents the primary focus of the project you're proposing. So for this example, I'm going to go with multidisciplinary. That's 14. Okay. Moving on to the next question. And I have this option clicked here already just because I tend to shoot more than one videos for this step-by-step video, and I cannot undo this. So yeah, just imagine that I haven't chosen any of the options yet. So let's talk about the grant type. We discussed these categories earlier in the first video, but this is the point where you'll need to decide which category best fits your practice. For artists, this often involves reflecting on the development of your practice, the body of work that you've created, and the level of recognition your work has received. For culture bearers, the answer may not always be as straightforward. Recognition may look different depending on the cultural tradition, community context, or the way knowledge is shared and preserved. Rather than focusing on a single achievement or milestone, I encourage applicants to think about the overall scope of your practice and where it currently is, and kind of like, where am I in this whole creative journey, and reflect on that. and use that as your parameter to choose either you are in emerging or in advancing. Now, side note, if staff have questions about the category you've selected, you may be contacted during the eligibility review process for additional clarification. Now, what is the eligibility review process? I am going to refer to our applicant journey document over here. So, I've talked about the applicant journey, I think, in the first video, so I won't be talking about what's in it, but I am going to go right away to the page, how the application process works. And then under step 2, staff review, it describes about this process a bit more. So, SEMAC staff review applications to verify eligibility and completeness. During the week following the application deadline, staff may contact applicants by email to request clarification, corrections, or additional information. It is important to monitor the email address associated with your grant account and respond promptly to any requests. Applications that do not meet eligibility requirements or fail to provide required materials may be ineligible for panel review. And then I listed some of the most common issues that I find when I do this review: missing venue confirmation, ineligible project activities, disallowed expenses or incorrect budget calculations, incomplete application sections, overdue or unapproved final reports, and a few small things here and there. And hence, keep an eye on your email, because sometimes these are small mistakes that you don't even realize when you click submit. And then when we review this before we send them to the panelists, we may find these small minor mistakes, and you have to fix that. So we'll probably put your application back to draft. You could fix that error and then resubmit, and then it'll go directly to the panelists. Anyway, let's circle back to, I'm just going to slide this so we could use it later. I'm going to circle back to the application form. So, all right, before we talk more about emerging and advancing, I also have one important note. It's important to remember that applicants who have previously received funding as an advancing artist or culture bearer may not later apply in the emerging category. So I highly recommend you to pause and think about where you are in the whole journey before you choose which one is the best fit for you. Of course, emerging and advancing have their own different grant request range. The range for an emerging artist or culture bearer is 2 to 4,000, whereas advancing is 3 to 6,000. And it is important to remember also that requesting the maximum or minimum amount does not make an application more competitive. All right, in this case, I'm going to choose advancing just so I can give you that example. All right, moving on to project title. So try to choose a short descriptive title that helps identify the project. Keep in mind that SEMAC may use this title in correspondence, contractual agreement, reports, and also publicity related to the grant. So I am going to use a dummy example of a project title that I worked on. Paste as plain text. Cool. So next, let's move on to brief project summary. So I want to give you a bit of a disclaimer before we start brief project summary. Beginning with a brief project summary and continuing throughout the narrative and the budget sections, I may occasionally share examples from previous project support grantees whose applications scored very well. These examples come from different applications and are used to illustrate specific concepts, questions, and approaches. Because of this, some examples may not connect directly to one another. Just like as an example, I'm going to use a past applicant example for the brief project summary, and it's not necessarily about River Stories Trail, right? When preparing your own application, remember that reviewers will be looking for a cohesive proposal in which the project description, narrative, public engagement plans, basically the whole application, how it all supports the same story. So I think I mentioned this in the second video of how you should look at this application form not as trying to answer one questions after another, but to think of it as like a whole storyline. And it's about developing that story and making sure everything responds to other things throughout the application form. Um, so yeah, while using examples from a single application would create a more connected example proposal, I believe drawing multiple successful applications provide a broader understanding of the different ways applicants can effectively respond to the questions throughout the application. So yeah, just keep that in mind. I think that by giving different examples could help you develop your own response. So I think I'm going to use shout out to one of our grantees from our last project support grant in January. Shout out to Lydia Hansen. I am going to use your brief project summary as an example here, and it is from her Eagle Bluff fungi hunt. And I thought that the summary really hits the spot in terms of what is expected from a summary. So I'm going to use that and we'll look into it together. Okay, so paste as plain text. Okay, let's read through it together. This temporary art installation at the Eagle Bluff Environmental Learning Center campus uses art to engage audiences in environmental learning. 12 crochet artworks by fiber artist Lydia Hansen showcase the region's fungi species, viewable by hiking select trails. Eagle Bluff nature educators will feature the art during environmental programming April to October 2026. SEMAC grant aid will cover artist costs and interpretive signs, providing asynchronous education to the general public. I love that. Okay, let me talk a bit about the brief project summary before we discuss this answer, okay? So think of this brief project summary as like a thumbnail sketch of your proposal. At this stage, you're not trying to tell reviewers everything about the project. You'll have plenty of space to do that later in the project narrative. So instead, focus on giving a concise overview of 3 things. Number 1, what you plan to create or accomplish. Now let's read the first sentence here. This temporary art installation at the Eagle Bluff Environmental Learning Center campus uses art to engage audiences in environmental learning. I feel that that's a check. Second, how the public will engage with the project. 12 crochet artworks by fiber artist Lydia Hansen showcases the region's fungi species viewable by hiking select trails. Check. And she even added one additional sentence here talking about the timeline. Perfect. Not necessary for if you're thinking of developing your own brief project summary, but it won't hurt to add that. And then the last sentence here is related to the third tips that I have to have a good brief project summary. How SEMAC funds will help make the project proposal. SEMAC grant aid will cover artist costs and interpretive signs, providing synchronous education to the general public. I love that. Okay, That is a terrific example. And just as a side note and context as well, brief project summary would be read out together with your project title during the panel review meeting. So the moderator would read out the project name followed by the brief project summary. So think of this as like we're in this virtual room, and then the moderator reads out your project title and then reads out the brief project summary, and feel how that would be like. And yeah, hopefully that brings a bit of context of where this would fit in the whole process. So moving on to the next part, does this project build upon existing work? Now, this is also a branching question. So this question sometimes causes applicants to pause because they worry that using existing work might make them ineligible. In most cases, that's not the concern. As we discussed earlier in video one, CMAC's focus is still on supporting the creation of new work. However, some projects may involve adapting, translating, interpreting, presenting, or expanding upon work that already exists. So if that describes your project, select yes. I am going to select yes just because then that will open up a branching section, question section, and then I could give you an example of how that is. Okay, moving on to project advisors. All right. So this question is really about understanding who will help make the project successful. Reviewers often pay close attention to this section because it helps them understand the experience, the expertise, and support networks surrounding the project. Depending on the project, these individuals might be collaborators, mentors, advisors, cultural practitioners, etc., etc. One thing to remember, though, is that CMAC is asking about meaningful involvement, right? Focus on the people who will play an important role in helping you plan, develop, complete, or present the project. If your project does not involve advisors or collaborators, the application provides an opportunity to explain how you will successfully complete the project on your own. Okay, so I have two examples that I want to pull out here. Again, I'm going to use Lydia's answer as the first example, and then I'm going to use another different example that I'll mention later. That would be an example of when you don't really have an advisor and you're thinking about, okay, so what should I put in here? Okay, so let's start with Lydia's project advisors, and let's read through it. Oops, sorry. Should have done paste as plain text. See? Okay. Colleen Forenbacher, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong, Executive Director of Eagle Bluff Environmental Learning Center, formerly Director of Eagle Bluff's Outdoor School Programming. Will not be compensated with grant funds, but will advise on installation sites based on Eagle Bluff's planned adult and youth outdoor programming activities for 2026. Will also take the lead organizing Eagle Bluff's annual outdoor programming that this project will support. And then I believe this has an enter to it. So like that. Tanner Barnhurst, Minnesota Master Naturalist, 22, and member of the Minnesota Mycological Society, 21. BS in Microbiology, MS in Environmental Engineering, and author of self-published field guide for Minnesota license. Paid collaborator, Barnhurst will volunteer time as a Minnesota Master Naturalist volunteer to advise Hansen in writing and editing interpretive signs to accompany the artwork. Barnhurst will be paid using grant funds to lead a 90-minute interpretive mycology hike sometime summer 2026, date TBD, as a more in-depth education opportunity. That's really nice. I really like that. Now, let's pull out the second example. And for this one, I want to shout out to give a shout out to Soo Jin Lee. She was also one of our grantee in our last grant window in January. And then her project title was Jamming with the Gaia Geum. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but if not, my apologies for that. Okay. And this is a perfect example, and you'll see in a moment here. I will just paste as plain text. Cool. This project is primarily designed to be completed independently. I will serve as the sole performer, facilitator, and educator, drawing on my professional training and experience as a Korean traditional musician and music educator to lead all performances and participatory sessions. While the core artistic and educational components will be fully carried out by me, I may consult a graphic designer for the creation of printed materials such as flyers or program pamphlets and seek limited guidance from a music therapist regarding participant engagement to make it more accessible. These roles are supportive in nature and do not constitute ongoing collaboration. The overall vision, content, and execution of the project will remain entirely under my direction. Perfect. It basically answers this last part here. If your project truly does not involve advisors or collaborators, briefly explain how you will complete the project successfully on your own. So we've talked about two very cool examples. I hope that was helpful. And so we will move on. Next. Okay, let's go through this real quick. The next two fields ask for specific dates, review start and end dates for requirements and restrictions about your project dates. These dates will become part of the grantee's contractual agreement. You may request date changes if your plans change. Make sure the pop-up calendar shows the correct year or manually enter MMDD. Okay, that sounds good. This is this. I'm talking about the start date. Okay, this is one of the most important dates in the application. Your start date is not simply the date you begin thinking about your project. Remember that. It becomes the official beginning of your grant period if your application is funded. This date matters because grant-related expenses or promotional materials for the specific project cannot be incurred or promoted before the start date. Okay? So when selecting a start date, make sure it aligns with your project timeline and allows enough time for planning and preparation. So for this for this grant round in July, the earliest start date would be October 26th. So you could use any date you think would be appropriate for your project after October 26th. Okay. So, as an example, I am just going to use October 30th as an example of a start date. And then, now the end date, your end date should reflect when all aspects of the project have been completed. This includes not only the public engagement activity itself, but also evaluation activities, final payments, and any remaining project responsibilities. A good rule of thumb that I always say to applicants is to allow yourself a little extra time rather than focusing a date that feels too ambitious. Okay? So realistic timelines often make projects easier to manage and reduce the need for future modifications. So let's just say, okay, when was it started again? October 30th. So let's just say that October 30th is my start date. Then I think I'll need like 3 months to prepare. So November, December, January would then be my public-facing program. So I'll leave a month after that to finish up everything. So let's just say February 28, 2027 is my end date. I feel that that's realistic and it's not too ambitious. So that is all for this first, well, not first, but first section of this video about your project. I hope this has been helpful for you in working on this section. So let's move on to for advancing applicants. And remember, this is a branching question that came out of this first question, the grant type question over here. Since we choose advancing, now we have this section over here. So let's move on to this one. Okay, so, and it only has one question really. So this question asks you to describe the accomplishment, recognition, awards, grants, exhibitions, performances, or other experiences that support your eligibility for the advancing category. The purpose of this question is to help establish eligibility for the advancing category. As a reminder, the advancing artists and culture bearers have a body of work that demonstrates a sustained level of accomplishment, commitment, and artistic excellence over several years. Their work has been exhibited or performed in prestigious venues, and they have earned awards or grants for their work. So, as you respond, focus on the experiences and accomplishments that best demonstrate the sustained development of your artistic or cultural practice. Once you've completed this section, you'll move into questions that further define the project itself, including projects that build upon existing work and your plans for public engagement. Okay? So I, again, am going to use an example from Sujin Lee. She responded to this question with this answer, and I think it also checks all of the boxes. Okay, we're going to read through this. I am frequently invited across Minnesota and the US to give lecture demonstrations on Gugak and the Gaiageum, including sessions at the MMEA conference. Since 2021, I have served as a teaching artist in residence at the MacPhail Center, reaching over 2,800 students. I also have received grants such as the University of Minnesota Community Engagement Team grants, the MacPhail Artist Development Grant, and the Minnesota State Art Board Creative Support for Individuals grant. Perfect. I think it checks all of the boxes, and that is all for the advancing applicants question. Then we could move on to the next one. Existing work. Okay, so this question asks you to describe the existing work that serves as the foundation for your project. Remember that earlier in the series, projects that build upon existing work are not automatically ineligible. So this is where you could explain. And what SEMAC is trying to understand here is why you selected this particular work, how it supports your own artistic or cultural development, and how the proposed project still contributes to the creation of a new work. In many cases, the focus is less about the existing work itself and more about what you are doing with it. How are you interpreting it? How are you adapting it, translating it, etc., in a new way? Your response should help reviewers understand the relationship between the existing work and the new work being created through this project. So a quick circling back as well that this is a branching question based upon this question over here. This is project built upon existing work. Okay, so I am going to have for this question, I'm going to have a fictional answer. The high scoring applications I've been referencing throughout this series did not trigger this particular question, so I don't have a strong real world example to share. Instead, I've created a sample response to help illustrate one possible way an applicant might approach it. Okay, so I am going to pull that out over here. Paste as plain text is the mantra of this application. Okay, so let's read through this. This project builds upon oral histories and community stories gathered through workshops, public programs, and cultural events. I selected this work because it reflects my practice as a culture bearer and storyteller and continues to resonate with community members. Rather than retelling these stories, the project transforms them into a new public art experience that creates new artistic work, expands their reach, and advances my creative practice. So I think that answers what is what this question is asking for, and we could move on to the final section that we will be talking about in this video: public engagement components. Okay. The next section focuses on the public engagement component. Throughout this video series, we've talked about public engagement as one of the core requirements of this grant program. As the section description explains up here, the grant proposal must include one or more opportunities for public engagement. If you've applied to a CMAC grant in previous years, you may remember this requirement being called the capstone event. While the requirement itself hasn't changed, the terminology has. This change was made in response to a feedback that we got to better reflect the many different ways the public can meaningfully engage with the project. The term capstone event sometimes gave the impression that public engagement had to be a final presentation or showcase at the end of the project. In reality, public engagement can happen at any point during your project if it meaningfully supports your artistic or cultural goals. For example, your public engagement might be an exhibition, performance, reading, or demonstration held near the end of the project. But it could also be an artist talk, a community discussion, a workshop, or even a pre release screening that allows you to gather feedback and strengthen the actual work that is being developed through this project. The important thing isn't when the public engagement happens, it's how it meaningfully connects the public with your work and supports the goals of your project. Now you'll begin providing specific details about how the public will experience the work you're creating. So that leads us to the first question over here: format of public component. The first question here is asking you to describe your public engagement activity. This is your opportunity to explain what the public experience will look like depending on the project. This could be an exhibition, performance, reading, workshop, demonstration, presentation, artist talk, anything really, as long as it's a public activity that is accessible to the public. As you respond, think beyond simply listing the event type, but more about how will people participate, what will they experience, how will they engage with the work, etc., etc. Remember that CMAC is looking for meaningful public engagement, so helping reviewers understand the audience experience is often just as important as describing the activity itself. Okay, so I have two different kind of format to answer this question. Shout out to Sojin Lee. This is her format of public component answer. Paste as plain text. So let's read this through together, and then later on I'll paste a different example. This project will engage the public through a combination of live performance and participatory music making workshops. Each session will include a short performance on the Gayagum, followed by an interactive guided workshop in which participants are invited to explore the mini trial Gayagums and play a simple melody together. Put a space over there. The project will be presented as a series of single-day sessions offered at multiple locations within the CMAC region, including Austin, and Rochester. All events will be open to the public, and participants of all ages and abilities will be welcome. Admission to the sessions will be free, ensuring accessibility and removing financial barriers to participation. Audience engagement will be encouraged through hands-on interaction with the instrument, group music making activities, and opportunities for participants to ask questions and learn about Korean traditional music in an informal, welcoming environment. Let's see if it included all of these type of activity or activities. Yes, check. Whether this is a single or multi-day component. Yes, check. Ticket prices or participation fees, if any. Yes, check. How you plan to engage audience or participants. Check. It checks all of the boxes. So now let's look at the second example. All right, so I have the second example here. Let me just paste this plain text. And what's really cool about this example is that it is in a different format from the first example. Okay, so let's review this together, okay? The hiking trails are open to the general public with no tickets or registration fees. Low-tech tracking, adding stones to a box will be used by visitors to document trail usage for the duration of the installation. Awesome. I think that answers the first bullet point here. Moving on. Eagle Bluff's adult nature programming and K through 8th grade outdoor school activities running May to October. These have fees attached as set by Eagle Bluff. The Fungi Hunt will supplement this existing programming but not replace any of these annual activities. Okay, I think this May to October part answers the second point here. And then ticket prices or participation fees are, I think that is answered here. Here it is, sorry. The fees attached are set by Eagle Bluff. That answers that part. And then let's review the last one. Additional public engagement opportunities specific to the grant project are an artist reception and a mycology hike led by Barnhurst. The reception will be free and held at the Schroeder Visitor Center to ensure access for all mobility types. Barnhurst's mycology hike will have a low registration fee as set by Eagle Bluff to offset their administrative costs to promote the event through their website and social media, but will have no other restrictions for attendance. Perfect. I think that all answers this last part here. How you plan to engage audience or participants. Awesome. So this is the second example. I hope it's as useful as the first example. It's in a different format, so you could choose either way. Both of them are great answers. It really depends on which kind of approach that you would prefer to adapt and to be an inspiration for you to make your own version of this answer. Cool. So either formatting type you could use. Now you understand how these two examples have answered this kind of prompt. So yeah, let's move on to online participation. Okay, so for the online participation, this question is asking you primarily for planning and reporting purposes. I think this would reflect in how you would evaluate your project. And it has like a separate, this is also a branching question, by the way. It will prompt a separate evaluation section at the end. So I'm just going to choose yes, but we won't be seeing the result of this yes option in this video. I think it'll be in the last video of the series. Okay, so moving on to specific date. One thing I want to mention here about online participation, if your project includes both in-person and online participation opportunities, simply indicate that here. So you cannot have only an online program, but you can have both. Okay, so moving on to specific date. This question is asking you for one specific date associated with your public engagement activities. This date serves two purposes. The first, SEMAC may use it for promotional purposes. And then second, it provides a date for SEMAC representatives to attend the activity when possible. This date should also fall between the start date and the end date identified elsewhere in your application. It could fall closer to the start date or closer to the end date or exactly in between the start date and end date. It really doesn't matter. We've had past applicants where they had a presentation closer to the start date. And then we've had, of course, examples of we also had exhibitions that happened towards the end of the project, so closer to the end date. So either way would work. One thing I would encourage applicants to pay attention to is that this date should not be tentative. So you should have a clear idea of when this will happen. Plans can certainly change, and we have what we call request to modify form, request to modify contract form. And what it is that it's a part of this procedure to request modifications when necessary. So, but at the time you submit this application, this date should reflect your actual plans, okay? So let's look at my start and end date before I answer that question. Start date, October 30th, end date, February 28th. And I think I thought of this end date because I was planning to have that specific date a month before this. So it'll be at the end of January. Okay, so January 2027. And I want to do this maybe this weekend. The 23rd of January would be perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to triple check. Start date, October 30th. End date, February 28th. Specific date is January 23rd. So, yep. I was just making sure that this date is in between the start and end date. So, awesome. Now, let's move on to this question. Dates for multiple public activities. If your project includes multiple public activities, you'll have an opportunity to list those dates here. This helps provide a fuller picture of the project's public engagement timeline. Let's use this example. Oops. This is what happens when you paste as plain text, is sometimes the formatting is not here. But that is the main reason why we do this, is to avoid that hidden formatting codes. Okay, so let's review this. This was the formatting example that we got for this question. So let's review these dates. May 2nd, 2026, installation opens to the public. May 23rd, 2026, artist reception. August 15th, guided mycology hike led by Tanner Barnhurst. Date subject to change. 10/15/26, installation ends. Perfect. I think that answers this question. Pretty straightforward. Yeah. Moving on. Public venue. So the next question, this is one of the most important in this section. Here, you'll identify the venue where your public engagement activity will take place. As you review the instructions, you'll notice several requirements related to public venues. The venue must be open and accessible to the public, and it must be able to accommodate the type of activity you're proposing. Applicants should also pay close attention to the venue confirmation requirement. This is really important. Before the application deadline, which is on July 28th at 11:59 p.m. Central Time, your venue contact must send an email to SEMAC, that is staff@semac.org, confirming that the venue will be available to hold your public engagement component on the specific date mentioned and that the space is accessible. Okay? This information is required and it is the applicant's responsibility to make sure it is received by the deadline. Because of this requirement, I strongly encourage applicants to begin conversations with venues early in the application process rather than waiting until the last minute. Okay. So I am going to use a dummy answer that I have. And it's fictional, guys. So moving on to inclement weather. The final question in this section applies to projects with outdoor public activities. If weather could affect your event, you'll be asked to describe your backup plan. This could involve an alternate location, a rescheduled date, or another contingency plan. The goal is simply to demonstrate that you've thought about how the project can proceed if conditions change. So, we have two different type of answers based on our two previous applicants. This was one of the answer. It will be indoors. Okay, since Lydia's project is heavily reliant on it being outdoors, this was her answer. Postpone 1 to 2 days to allow installation in dry weather. Postponed hikes will be rescheduled to a future weekend date, and artist or educator talks will be moved to the Schroeder Visitor Center. Awesome. Okay, so that concludes this part of public engagement component part of this section, and it concludes the third video. At this point, you've completed the sections of the application that define the basic framework of your project. You've identified what you plan to do, how the public will engage with the work, who may be helping you accomplish the project, and when and where the project will take place. In the next video, we'll move into the project narrative section of the application. This is where you'll have an opportunity to fully explain your artistic vision, the need for the project, and your ability to successfully accomplish the work you're proposing. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Again, I'm Desmond Annebrand, Grant Programs Manager here at Southeastern Minnesota Arts Council. Email me at staff@semac.org or call me at 507-281-4848. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.